pack your things and get out. This is our home now, not yours." My own son said that to me, standing in the kitchen of the house I helped him buy, the house I liquidated 31 years of retirement savings to make possible. He pointed at the door like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at him for a long moment, and then I picked up my coffee mug, rinsed it in the sink, set it down, and walked out. I was smiling. He didn't understand why. He still doesn't. Let me back up. My name is Eugene. Well, people call me Gene, and I spent 34 years working as a project manager for a civil engineering firm in Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous work, but honest work. My wife Carol and I raised 2 kids in a 3-bedroom house on Birchwood Lane, drove used cars, packed lunches, and did everything right. When Carol passed from pancreatic cancer 6 years ago, it broke something in me that I'm not sure ever fully healed. But I kept going. I kept working 2 more years after she died, and when I finally retired at 63, I had my pension, my Social Security, and just under $210,000 in a savings account that Carol and I had spent decades building together, dollar by dollar. My son, Dwayne, he's 36, was always the one I worried about less. Steady kid, good head on his shoulders, got an accounting degree, had a decent job at a mid-sized firm downtown. My daughter Lena, she lives out in Portland and calls every Sunday without fail. She's the one who told me years ago, "Dad, just watch yourself with Dwayne's wife." I didn't listen. I should have. Dwayne married Rochelle about 4 years ago. She came for money, or at least she acted like she did. Always the nicest restaurants, always the newest phone, always had an opinion about everything, especially about how Dwayne should be living and what he deserved. She wore it like a second skin. I tried to like her. I genuinely did. Carol would have wanted me to give her a fair shot. So I did. The trouble started small, the way it always does. About 2 years after the wedding, Dwayne called me one Sunday evening, which was unusual. He usually texted. He said Rochelle and he had been looking at houses, that the rental market was brutal, that they wanted to put down roots. He said they'd found something perfect. A 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville. Good school district. Quiet street. List price was $385,000. They'd saved up about $40,000 for a down payment, but with the rates the way they were going to get crushed on the monthly payment. He paused. Then he said, "Dad, I know this is a lot to ask. I want to be honest here. I didn't hesitate. Not because I'm naive, but because this was my son, my flesh. I thought about Carol and how she used to say the whole point of building something is so you have something to hand down. I thought about how she would have done the same thing without blinking. So I said yes. I said I'd contribute $130,000 toward the purchase, enough to bring their loan down to something manageable, something they could actually breathe with." Dwayne cried. Actual tears. He said, "Dad, I'll never forget this. You're going to be so taken care of. Your family. This is your home too." Those words. This is your home too. Rochelle got on the phone after him. She said, "We're going to take such good care of you, Gene. You've been alone too long. We want you close." Her voice was warm. I remember thinking she sounded like she meant it. I wired the money in March. We closed on the house in April. In May, Dwayne and Rochelle threw a housewarming party and didn't invite me until 4 hours before it started, with a text that said, "OB12, we're having a few PPL over tonight if you want to stop by." When I arrived, Rochelle was showing people around her house and at one point introduced me to a neighbor as Dwayne's father, with the exact energy of someone introducing an obligation. I stood by the snack table most of the night. I drove home at 9 o'clock. I told myself it was just nerves. New home. Lots going on. In June, I came by on a Saturday with some tomato plants Carol used to grow. I thought Rochelle might like a little garden in the backyard, something to make the place feel like home. Rochelle answered the door, and before I could even get the words out, she said, "We're kind of in the middle of something, Gene. Can you maybe call ahead next time?" The door closed before I finished nodding. Dwayne called later that night. He sounded stiff, like he was reading from something. He said that Rochelle felt like boundaries were important, that dropping by unannounced made her uncomfortable, that they were still settling in and needed space. I said I understood. I did not understand. In July, I drove past the house. I wasn't even going to stop. I was just in the neighborhood, and I saw a brand new Audi Q7 in the driveway. Silver. I figured maybe it was company. I mentioned it to Dwayne later that week, casually, and he said, "Yeah, we figured it was time for an upgrade. Rochelle's been wanting one for a while." He said it like it was nothing. Like he hadn't just taken $130,000 of money his mother and I spent 3 decades saving. That car started around $65,000. I did the math in my head and felt something go cold in my stomach. I started calling less. I didn't want to feel what I was starting to feel. It didn't help. In August, I got a handwritten note in the mail. Actual handwriting, which felt deliberate. It was from Rochelle. She wrote that she and Dwayne had been talking and felt that for the health of their marriage, they needed to establish a more formal relationship with extended family members. She said that my unannounced visits and frequent contact were creating stress. She said they hoped I'd understand. Extended family. I was extended family now. I was the man who gave them $130,000 of my retirement savings, and I was extended family. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after reading that note. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she'd say. I decided she'd say, "Don't let them break you, but don't be foolish either." I called my estate attorney the next morning. His name is Marshall, been handling my affairs for 12 years, knew Carol. I told him what was happening. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Gene, I'm glad you called." What followed was about 6 weeks of quiet. Dwayne would text occasionally, surface-level things. "How are you, Dad? Hope you're doing well." Nothing warm, nothing real. Rochelle went completely silent. I responded politely and said nothing about what I was doing with Marshall. Then came September. Dwayne called on a Tuesday morning, which again was unusual. His voice had a different quality. Tighter, clipped. He said he and Rochelle had been talking and they felt it was best if I stopped reaching out so much and gave them more extended space. I asked him to define what he meant. He was quiet. Then he said, "I mean, we're adults, Dad. We have our own life." I asked him, "Is this about the money?" He said, "This isn't about money." I said, "Okay." Then I called Marshall. What most people don't know is that when I originally handed over the $130,000, it didn't go directly to the seller. It went, with Marshall's help, through a very specific legal mechanism, a structured family loan agreement, notarized, with a repayment schedule and an interest rate set at the IRS minimum required rate for intra-family loans. At the time, Dwayne had signed it without fully reading it. Rochelle had been in the room. I remember she'd given it a quick glance and then looked at her phone. They both thought it was just paperwork, something I was doing for tax purposes. It was not just paperwork. The agreement included a clause, standard in Marshall's templates, something he'd been using for 15 years, that stated the full balance became due and payable within 30 days if the borrower materially reduced contact with the lender without documented reason, or if the lender determined, in good faith, that the family relationship had been substantially altered. In plain English, if my son and his wife pushed me out of their lives, the loan came due. Marshall sent the formal notice on a Wednesday. Certified mail, signature required, $130,000 plus accumulated interest payable within 30 days. Dwayne called me 17 minutes after he signed for it. He was not calm. "What is this?" he said. "What did you do?" I said, "I protected myself, son. You can't just, this is our home. Rochelle is." He stopped. Started again. "You're going to take our house?" I said, "I'm not taking anything. I'm asking to be repaid what I lent you, as per the agreement you signed." "Dad, we don't have $130,000. I said I was aware. There was a long silence. Then he said, "I need to call Rochelle." He called back 2 hours later. Different tone entirely. He said he wanted to meet, that they wanted to talk in person, that this had all been a misunderstanding. He said Rochelle felt terrible about the note. I said I'd meet them at their house on Saturday. He said great. He sounded relieved, like the meeting itself was going to fix everything. Saturday came. I drove to Westerville. The Audi Q7 was in the driveway. I parked behind it and sat in my car for a minute, thinking about the last time I'd felt this way. A particular kind of clarity before something hard. It reminded me of the morning Carol went into the hospital for the last time. Not the same grief, but that same sense of knowing something is over. I rang the doorbell. Rochelle answered it before Dwayne could. She was wearing a smile I'd never seen on her before. Soft, apologetic, genuine seeming. She said, "Gene, please come in. We're so glad you're here." They had coffee waiting. Pastries from the bakery on High Street. The nice one. Rochelle had clearly orchestrated this carefully. We sat at the kitchen table. Dwayne started talking. He talked for a long time about stress and work pressure and how the transition to homeownership had been harder than expected. He said Rochelle had been going through some things. He said communication had broken down and that was nobody's fault, and they both loved me very much. He reached across the table and grabbed my hand at one point. His eyes got wet. He said, "Dad, you know you're not extended family to me. You're my dad. I'm sorry." Rochelle was nodding along to everything, touching her coffee mug with both hands, looking at the table. I let him finish. Then I looked at Rochelle. I said, "I'd like to hear from you." She looked up. Something shifted in her face, almost imperceptible. Then she said she was sorry, that she'd let her anxiety drive her behavior, that she'd had a complicated relationship with her own parents, and sometimes she didn't handle boundaries well. She said she hoped we could start fresh. I said, "I'd like that, but I also need to be honest with you both about something." They looked at me. I said, "I'm not going to forgive the loan. The agreement stands, but I'm willing to renegotiate the terms, not because of what just happened, but because you're my family and I don't want to destroy your life to make a point. What I do want, what I need, is to actually be treated like family, not managed, not scheduled, not tolerated." Rochelle opened her mouth. I held up one hand. "Let me finish," I said. "I need to be able to call my son on a Tuesday night without it being an imposition. I need to be invited to holidays without a reminder that I should call ahead. I need to know that when my grandchildren, whenever that happens, exist in this world, they will know who I am. That's what I need. Not money, not the house back. I need my son." Dwayne was fully crying by the end of that. Not the performance kind, the kind that doesn't have anywhere to go. Rochelle was quiet for a long time. Then she said, quietly, "I hear you, Gene." We talked for 3 more hours that afternoon. Real talking, not the polished kind. Rochelle admitted eventually that her mother had always told her that husbands had to choose, their wives or their parents, and that she'd internalized it as a survival mechanism she'd never questioned. She said it out loud like she was hearing it for the first time herself. I don't know if that fully excuses what she did. I've thought about it a lot. What I've landed on is this. People carry damage they didn't choose, and sometimes they spend their whole lives handing that damage to people who didn't deserve it. The question isn't whether it was justified. The question is what you do with it when it's sitting across from you at a kitchen table. We signed a revised loan agreement with Marshall 3 weeks later. The interest was reduced. The repayment schedule was extended over 10 years. There was no clause about contact. I removed it, not because I'd become naive again, but because I'd already made my point and I didn't need to keep making it. Dwayne calls me on Sunday nights now. As for the last 8 months, we talk about the Buckeyes and whether the backyard needs resodding, and sometimes about Carol, about things she used to say, things I haven't been able to say out loud to anyone since she died. Those conversations feel like something I thought I'd lost. Rochelle and I are not best friends. We're probably never going to be. But she remembered my birthday in March without Dwayne prompting her. She sent a card, a real one, not a text, and inside it she wrote, in her own handwriting, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I keep it on my kitchen counter. The Audi is gone. They sold it in October. Dwayne told me it was a financial decision. He didn't say anything else about it. I didn't ask. I still have the original note Rochelle sent me in August, the one about extended family and formal relationships. I haven't thrown it away. I don't look at it often. But every once in a while, when I start to feel too comfortable, too settled, I take it out and read it again. Not out of bitterness. Just as a reminder. You can love someone completely and still refuse to disappear for them. That's the thing Carol tried to teach me, that I was too stubborn to learn until I was 64 years old and standing alone in my kitchen, reading a letter from my daughter-in-law that told me I was peripheral. I'm a slow learner. But I got there. And I never did unpack those tomato plants. I kept them. They're on my back porch now. 3 of them in big clay pots, doing just fine on their own.